The great offensive operations of the Ukrainian armed forces continue at full speed. Within this plan, Ukrainian forces continue to blockade the Russians in the Zaporizhia region. Most recently, the Ukrainians carried out simultaneous offensive operations in the southwest and southeast of the city of Orikhiv. In this region, as a result of these attacks, Russian trenches were split in Vasilivka, southwest of Orikhiv, and Poloi, southeast of the city. Then the Ukrainians captured the city of Storazev. This formed the basis of the link between the Donetsk and Zaporizhia regions, and the Ukrainians used this critical line of attack very well. As a result, Ukrainian forces in the Zaporizhia region continued their advance outside the city of Orikhiv. In addition, when the military convoy that the Russians sent as a support force to Orikhiv was stopped by the White Wolves Special Forces of Ukraine in Zaporizhia, the Russian soldiers were helpless in the other front lines of both Orikhiv and Zaporizhia. The Ukrainians, on the other hand, have recently turned Orikhiv into a strategic center in order to use the advantage they have gained effectively and shape their offensive axis. According to the situation in this city, while the northeastern lines of the city extended to the fronts in Donetsk, the southwestern direction was adjacent to critical areas such as Tokmak, Melitopol, and Kherson. So Orikhiv was a good strategic center chosen by the Ukrainians to direct the clashes in both Zaporizhia and Donetsk. With the blockade of the Russians in this city, it was predicted that the Ukrainian armed forces would organize a new offensive operation to the southwest of Orikhiv, that is, to the Tokmak sides. Yes, fierce clashes have been going on in Tokmak for about a week, but these clashes were not a new offensive by Ukrainian forces, but rather actions by Ukrainian partisan and volunteer units. Of course, the military units of the Ukrainian army took part in these actions, but the Ukrainian army turned its offensive axis not to the southwest of Orikhiv but to the northeast of the city. In this direction was the settlement of Blahodad, which is one of the targets of the Ukrainians. Ukrainian troops recently launched an incredible offensive operation to seize this city. After prolonged and violent clashes, Ukrainian forces succeeded in seizing the city. The Ukrainian military reported the successful recapture of the village of Blahodad in the eastern Donetsk region, marking a potential counteroffensive against Russian forces. Although the Ukrainian authorities have refrained from making the operation public, the withdrawal of Blahodad represents significant progress. The 68th Separate Hunting Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces posted a video on Facebook showing soldiers proudly flying the Ukrainian flag on a damaged building in the recaptured Blahodad. The Ukrainian ground forces confirmed in a separate social media post that the brigade had successfully recaptured Blahodad. Brigade spokesman Myroslav Semeniuk said an assault team had arrested 6 Russian soldiers as they entered several buildings where about 60 soldiers had taken refuge. The Russians then continued to bombard the Ukrainian forces in Blahodad. But this does not seem to stop Kyiv's offensive plans, because the Ukrainian armed forces announced that their next goal is to capture the village of Voruzhginy and plans to advance south. However, Western and Ukrainian leaders have consistently warned against undue rush, stressing that efforts to deport Russian forces more broadly will require significant time and strategic planning. So it remains important to be cautious as wider efforts to deport Russian troops are expected to take some time. On the other hand, while Russia continues to claim to repel the Ukrainian attacks, the withdrawal of Blahodad points to Ukraine's striking advances on the Donetsk lines. Vladimir Rogov, an official commissioned by the Russians in the Zaporizhia region, claimed that Blahodad, along with 2 other villages in Zaporizhia, was in a contentious gray area for control. Rogov also claimed that Ukrainian forces briefly captured another village in the neighboring Donetsk region but were quickly driven out by Russian troops. In other words, the big offensive plans of the Ukrainians continue simultaneously from critical regions such as Zaporizhia and Donetsk. Ukrainians continue to oppress other parts of the Donetsk front lines. Now, the Russians fear that the Ukrainian forces, after capturing Blahodad, will refocus on the Donetsk front lines. While the Zaporizhia region has been the center of clashes for about a few weeks, the Ukrainian success in Donetsk may justify the Russians' concerns. Russian leader Vladimir Putin, on the other hand, seems to have already taken action with the concern of this situation. Vladimir Putin is preparing to make moves to tighten control of the Wagner Group led by the businessman Yevgeny Prigozhin. It reflects that Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu's request that Wagner Group troops sign contracts with the Russian ministry by July 1st is part of an effort to curb Prigozin's independence. But Prigozhin refused Shoigu's order on this matter. His paramilitary unit played a critical role in Russia's efforts to capture the industrial city of Bakhmut in Ukraine's eastern region. He escalated public criticism of Russia's military leadership, including Shoigu, before his troops were withdrawn from Bakhmut this month. The Wagner leader accused Russian Defense Minister Shoigu of deliberately depriving his fighters of ammunition and support. Prigozhin also stated that these orders and decrees from Shoigu applied to employees of the Russian Ministry of Defense and military personnel, and that the Wagner Group will not sign any agreements with him. Prigozhin also published an alleged part of a letter from the Russian Ministry of Defense instructing Wagner and other volunteer military formations to inform the Joint Chief of Staff of the Russian Forces Group about the numbers of their forces, their reserves, and the supplies they received from the Russians. Later, Prigozhin claimed that his paramilitary group recruited 2.5 times more soldiers after provocative announcements that the Wagner private military company should cease to exist. Also, Yevgeny Prigozhin claimed that the men signed up to join Wagner to avoid signing a contract with the Russian Ministry of Defense. But the Russian Defense Ministry's efforts to formalize the Wagner Group were likely aimed at centralizing control of Russian irregular personnel and supplies and restricting Prigozhin's independence in response to the Ukrainian counteroffensive. It was also included that Viktor Sobolev, a member of the Russian State Duma Defense Committee, said that the Ministry of Defense could prohibit the Wagner Group from operating in Ukraine without first signing military contracts. Given that the Ukrainian forces have launched a new counterattack, one prominent Mil blogger claimed the timing of Shoigu's announcement was awkward. In fact, Mil bloggers were quite right about this. It would only be to Moscow's detriment if the Russian defense minister had withdrawn or not supported the Wagner mercenaries from the battlefield. While the Ukrainians had made such effective progress in both Donetsk and Zaporizhia, the fact that the Russian MOD prioritizes the bureaucratic elimination of Wagner instead of focusing on the counterattack may even lead to the Ukrainian victory in this war. But the Wagner Group's maverick doing whatever it wants on the battlefield could also upset Moscow's plans. Russian leader Vladimir Putin, who saw this critical point, took these critical steps through the Russian Ministry of Defense to control and regulate the Wagner Group. In the coming days, Putin wants to bring the mercenary group both psychologically and physically in order, as Wagner forces will be on the ground again to stop or slow the Ukrainian advance. You know, the Wagner forces put a lot of effort into Bakhmut. Now, this city is at risk for the Russians, with the Ukrainians turning their offensive axis back to the Donetsk front lines. Therefore, Putin must urgently spruce up the Wagner forces and drive this mercenary group back to the battlefield as reinforcements as soon as possible. If not, the Ukrainians' next move may be to take complete control of Bakhmut. In summary, the Ukrainians are getting closer and closer to a decisive victory in the admirable large offensive operations. The effects of the Russia-Ukraine war are spreading to wider areas with each passing day. Russia's aggressive politics and aimless aggression are on the rise in the Baltics. The Baltic Sea and its airspace have faced risky moves by Russian jets, spy ships, and drones many times before. In recent days and months, there has been a serious increase in violations or attempts by the Russian Air Force in the Baltic. But NATO members take very seriously their responsibility to ensure the integrity, safety, and security of airspace in the Baltics. Warplanes assigned to NATO's Baltic Air Policing mission often serve to visually identify Russian Federation Air Force aircraft. Royal Air Force Typhoons is one of the Air Force members continuing NATO's Baltic Air Policing mission. The most important mission of British jets in recent days is to prevent dangerous flights of Russian fighter jets. A large part of the flight activity of the Russian Federation Air Force is due to the geographical situation of the Russian enclave of Kaliningrad. Russian Air Force aircraft regularly fly from mainland Russia to Kaliningrad and vice versa. Often Russian jets approach or fly close to NATO airspace without using transponders, communicating with air traffic control, or making a flight plan. We have faced a similar critical situation recently. The Russian Air Force again tried to make risky maneuvers in the Baltic airspace, but NATO forces were always ready. Here are all the details of this critical moment. British Typhoons and Swedish Air Force Gripens recently took off from an Estonian base to intercept a Russian Air Force spyplane escorted by a Sukhoi Su-27 fighter jet flying close to NATO and Swedish airspace. The Russian Ilyushin Il-20 intelligence collection aircraft was among the aircraft detected in this exchange. Russia's Ilyushin Il-20 intelligence-gathering aircraft was capable of analyzing military communications and signals to assist attacking aircraft or ground forces. However, this Russian warplane flying close to Swedish airspace did not comply with international norms, as it did not communicate about its movement with the relevant flight information zones. So Royal Air Force Typhoons attacked the Russian spyplane twice in just one day near NATO airspace. Typhoons also conducted multiple sorties to intercept two Russian military aircraft traveling south from mainland Russia in the direction of Kaliningrad Oblast. The UK Department of Defense reported that Russian aircraft did not communicate with the appropriate flight information zones, but remained in international airspace and flew professionally. British Typhoon fighter jets then intercepted two Russian Tupolev Tu-22 meters backfires and two Su-30 flanker aces flying over the Gulf of Finland and the Baltic Sea from mainland Russia. 18 jets from the Finnish Air Force joined the Typhoon aircraft while escorting backfires and flanker across the Gulf of Finland past them to the Swedish Gripens, Portuguese, and Romanian 16th stationed at Seoul Air Base in Lithuania. Also accompanied the Russian jets moving south over Latvian and Lithuanian fires. This striking situation came after the UK Foreign Secretary visited the RAF platoon, currently serving in Estonia for Operation Azotus. James Cleverly arrived at Amari Air Base, where he met with senior RAF personnel responsible for leading the crew involved in intercepting Russian aircraft. As a result, British warplanes were able to intercept a Russian Air Force spyplane escorted by an elite Sukhoi Su-27 fighter jet. Swedish Air Force Gripens joined the RAF Typhoons during the tense encounter, for the first intercept took place close to Swedish airspace. The second occurred when Russian jets flew towards the Kaliningrad Oblast. This was a routine interception that involved pilots and technicians from one squadron from 140 East Wings, fulfilling their responsibility to secure the Baltic skies. UK Defence Secretary Ben Wallace praised the British pilots involved in the response, noting that the interceptions are a stark reminder that the Royal Air Force is always ready to defend the skies of its allies, despite a marked increase in regional activity. Their success in intercepting Russian aircraft continues its normal course for them, and is ready to respond to any mission that may pose a threat to regional security. British Typhoons now take off from Amari Air Base in Estonia, where they are usually based as part of NATO's air policing mission. But the Royal Air Force will hand over this task to the Spanish Air Force in August. The Eurofighter Typhoon is a European multinational twin-engine, delta-wing, multi-role fighter aircraft. The Typhoon was originally conceived as an air superiority fighter and was produced by a consortium of Airbus, BAE Systems, and Leonardo, which handled most of the project through a joint holding company. Eurofighter Yax Flipside GmbH. NATO, Eurofighter and Hurricane Management Agency representing the UK, Germany, Italy, and Spain, manages the project and is the main client. The Eurofighter Typhoon is an extremely agile aircraft designed to be an effective dogfight in combat. Later, production aircraft were increasingly better equipped to take on air-to-surface attack missions and to be compatible with an increasing number of different weapons and equipment, including the Storm, Shadow, Brimstone, and Model Air missiles. The Typhoon made its first battle with the British Royal Air Force and the Italian Air Force by conducting aerial reconnaissance and ground attack during the military intervention in Libya in 2011. In addition, the Royal Air Force assumed primary responsibility for air defense missions for most of the client countries. In other words, Typhoon, with its incredible speed, maneuverability, and modern onboard systems, is the perfect platform to carry out these interceptions. Therefore, the Russians cannot comfortably use their air force in the Baltics to gather intelligence or make any risky moves. All this collaborative work of NATO member and allied countries is provided by the NATO Baltic Air Policing Mission for member states that do not have the necessary air capabilities. Agreements exist to provide a single standard of security in European NATO airspace. Since the three Baltic members Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia do not have the aircraft assets on their soils to contribute to NATO air policing, Alliance members provide the necessary capabilities for them, especially the UK and Germany's Eurofighter Typhoon jets are among the most important Air Force members we have heard of lately for NATO's Baltic security. Allies are deployed on a 4-month rotation basis to air bases in South Lithuania and Amari, Estonia respectively, and are ready to be launched when necessary by NATO's Combined Air Operations Center in Germany. UDIM. The Lithuanian, Latvian, and Estonian Air Forces contribute to the mission with host country support in the form of air command and control, infrastructure, and personnel. Providing equal protection to all member states is an important measure to show the alliance's solidarity, determination, and collective defense not only to current members, but also to our partner countries and potential future members. When the 3 Baltic states joined NATO in 2004, a NATO air policing capability was established at Sali Air Base in Lithuania. In 2014, after Russia's illegal and illegitimate annexation of Crimea, a second air police presence was established at Estonia's Amari Air Base as part of NATO's assurance measures to Eastern allies. If you remember before, the Russian planes in the Baltics were stopped by the RAFs. Putin's air force was constantly blocked in this critical airspace. Such situations are very common as warplanes serving as NATO air police in the Baltic states are constantly active over the Baltic Sea to detect and escort Russian aircraft violating international airspace flight rules. For example, in recent months, NATO air police warplanes had detected a Russian Tupolev Tu-134 aircraft passing through international airspace from the Russian Federation's Kaliningrad region to the Russian mainland. As a result of long flights, these Russian planes were stopped without performing risky maneuvers and flights in the airspace of the Baltics and Kaliningrad. In summary, the Baltics are now carefully guarded from dangerous maneuvers and flights of the Russian Air Force by RAF Typhoon jets and Swedish Gripens and other NATO air forces. Passage is not provided to the Russian Air Force in this airspace. The developments of the de-escalation between Russia and Ukraine have sent shockwaves around the world. Partisans carefully trained by Ukraine finally appeared and proved once again for all that Mariupol is Ukrainian territory. With the help and training of the army, the heroic Ukrainian people organized local groups to fight the Russian invaders. The partisans were the most successful of these groups. The partisans recently demonstrated their courage and success by killing 3 colonels in a car bomb operation. In these times of intensifying war, it is believed that great victories are possible with the help and struggle of the local right to the Ukrainian army. Ukrainians stand together during this great conflict. The Ukrainian people realizing that it is not only the army's responsibility to protect their homes and their country, but also their own, join the army and receive the necessary training. The success of operations against Russian supporters and Russian partisans has boosted the confidence of many of those who hold this view. Indeed, after all, their hard work paid off and Putin's of how dire the situation was, really, he started to take it seriously. With their latest operation, these partisans were able to deliver the message to Russian President Vladimir Putin in Mariupol. Putin's loyalists who believe that anyone in any group with the same worldview will eventually meet the same fate. We will not rest until every inch of Ukraine is cleared of invaders and the flag of victory is raised. They also made statements that the citizens of Mariupol are aware that we have brought everything we need to the city, and that as long as we stay, we will bring the end of Russia. No matter how much this group shows their talent, they insist that they are just getting started. They claim that the Russians will come out of their hiding places where they cannot be seen or heard, and that they will continue to destroy the opposition. It is completely unknown what these groups will do next, fearing the next move by Russian forces. It predicts that the elimination of senior officers in the Russian armed forces will be the partisans' biggest strategic victory. Partisans typically use bomb attacks as their primary battle tactic. This tactic has been used in recent operations, which have been devastating for Russia. Rumors began to spread that the Russians would mistreat the locals and support collaborators. As a result, partisan groups enraged by what they learned mobilized their plans, focused on eliminating key personnel, would deal a devastating blow to the Russian army and ultimately lead to their losses. The main objective of these operations was to push back the invaders and reclaim Ukrainian territory that rightfully belonged to the Ukrainian people. They began to spy on the 3 colonels they were after, looking for their jobs and settlements. The plot involved planting bulbs under the vehicles of the three aforementioned colonels and detonating them. Metropolitan Street now had a residence where all the returning colonels lived. The most important aspect of the success of this operation was the colonels' negligence as a result of Russian mishaps and earthquakes. The heroic partisan organizations acted in time to plant a remote-controlled bomb under the car while it was parked in front of the intended target's house. They knew that once the cardinals were safely inside the car, the bombs they had planted would explode. After all the trouble the colonels went through, they introduced the death penalty as a punishment for their carelessness and lack of focus. The car, ready to go, safely pulled the trigger, and the bombs exploded, just as the partisans had planned. This car, containing 3 colonels, was blown to smithereens. With this victorious operation, the partisans proved themselves once again. The partisans said that the Russian forces will cause exponentially more damage with each exposure to the partisans, that when they hear their name, they will not even sit still, that they will wake up from their sleep. Putin will ignore the operation and call it a fake attempt, the partisans said. The actions of the Ukrainian partisans have left a lasting impression on the world, and the moral inspiration provided by their words and banners helps to establish them as a group in solidarity with the Ukrainian people. The partisans claim that all Russian occupation troops will eventually die, especially the leaders chosen by the occupiers. According to reports from outside Ukraine, these partisan groups were crucial to the final outcome of the war. A few days after this development, the head of the Russian occupiers and heroes, Kakovka Andrei Stepa, or 3 colonels, followed the same path as the guerrilla, who in a similar operation, killed 80 soldiers and planted a bomb in the car he was driving. The tough and serious demeanor of the partisans gradually made the invading Russian army think twice before taking action. They were clearly terrified, and the psychological shock of having to be on patrol all the time contributed significantly. Putting a premium on the moral high ground, the partisans at every square centimeter of Ukraine shouting, "Can't you leave?" in the field of psychology. Phrases suggesting pressure such as "Hi Mars will help you" are common. Local troops are what partisans call themselves when they demand support for Ukraine from the past. The Ukrainian government offers significant support to grassroots organizations led by ordinary Ukrainians. Local communities, and those across the country are given equal importance. Everyone who fights for the independence and freedom of Ukraine fully supports this, and for that we are grateful to the whole world. Everything involved is working towards the same goal: to expel the invading Russian troops from the country at any cost, at any price. War experts say that when such examples emerge from a region, it strengthens people's determination to fight for independence and their love for Ukraine. It guarantees that every citizen is aware of the importance of the so-called national war and is willing to sacrifice everything for his country. Russia's position on these issues and its public stance have been laid out. The Ukrainian people's opposition to the occupation is one of the groups that Russia condemns and collects intelligence on. Russia is notoriously active in Ukraine's trunk show, providing intelligence on entrenched partisans and offering rewards to informants who intimidate those predisposed to partisanship. It is clear that Russia fears these political groups and will stop at nothing to prevent a repeat performance. Even if the partisans are not organized as an army, Putin is still concerned that they can still organize significant activities outside of direct conflicts, that their enemies are fully involved, and that the damage they can do and produce can be endless. Experts say that Ukraine and other nations' support for Ukraine are daily triggers for every crisis in Russia. These internal issues should not be ignored in this enormous war. Putin supporters are the only ones who seem to have discovered a place of safety in Russia. Russian. Arthur Smolyaninov was labeled a Ukrainian agent by Putin, who trusts no one, not even Russian citizens. Young Russians have reacted across the country, saying they feel they have lost their independence and are afraid to speak out against it, feeling that they owed too much to their nation and Putin. Young Russians began to leave him for other countries, thus gaining the independence they had long sought but were denied by their government. Putin's tenuous hold on his people is on full display in every situation, as he easily prioritizes his own power over his people and does nothing to stop it. The developments of the de-escalation between Russia and Ukraine have sent shockwaves around the world.